All right, we are live. We're going to be talking tonight a little bit about the parable of the weeds. And as we are doing that, this is actually it's actually a podcast that we're recording. So you might hear a little bit of different things from the podcast side of things, but I also do these in a live stream format. So we're talking about the parable of the weeds. So here we go. You've made it to another book club episode of the Unbelief Podcast, and we are continuing to process different stories that Jesus told and look at them from a different lens, a lens that understands their cultural background, but also a lens that helps us become the best version of ourselves. And so what we are going to do is we're going to start by actually reading this parable in its entirety from the New Revised Standard Updated Edition. It's from the book of Matthew, chapter 13, and in the New Revised Standard Updated Edition, again, the book of Matthew, chapter 13, and we are looking at it starting, it's in verse 24. So here's what it says. It says, "He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed a good seed in a field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among them, so the wheat then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, 'Master, did you not sow good seeds in your field? Where then did these weeds come from?' He answered, 'An enemy has done this.' The slave said to him, 'Then do you want us to go and gather them?' But he replied, 'No, for in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at the harvest time, I will tell the reapers, collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn.'" Okay, so this is an interesting parable, and this parable begins, it says, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to. And this beginning phrase, the kingdom of heaven, it starts with that. And it's important because sometimes you will read that the kingdom of heaven is going to be compared to, and you sort of brush over that. You sort of skirt over that just a little bit so that you can get to, the good stuff, like what you think is the most important thing. But that beginning actually, the beginning of that actually has a really important role to play in characterizing what the parable is actually talking about. And this idea of the kingdom of heaven, that's a really interesting idea in the teachings of Jesus, because in the ancient world, that meant something already, right? When you and I think about the kingdom of heaven in the modern world, we might be tempted to assume that means heaven, like a place where God dwells, or maybe heaven, the place where you want to go when you die, or something like that. However, in the ancient world, the kingdom of heaven was not that at all. And so it's important for us to keep in mind what that was. Oh, the other thing that you might think is, if you're being a little bit more metaphorical, the kingdom of heaven is the people that will get to go to heaven, right? Heaven is our modern view of heaven is pretty problematic. When we talk about finding that in the Bible, it's kind of like hell. There is a lot that has been said about heaven and taught about heaven. That's not really in the Bible, but there's lots of traditions around it. Anyway, yes, heaven is, in our modern conception, is kind of problematic when it comes to the Bible. But this idea of the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of heaven sort of coming, it was this revolution. It was this upending of the order of things. And when Jesus says the kingdom of heaven, it's political, it's social, it's spiritual, and it's a whole other politic, a whole other way of thinking about society, a whole other way of thinking about spirituality. And all of that in that moment in the ancient Near Eastern world in the first century, it was something that was supposed to be in contrast to Rome's sort of violent, oppressive, peace through strength kind of place, kind of empire. This idea is that God is going to reclaim the world from oppression, injustice, that God is going to be restoring peace and fairness to society. It's starting like in right here and now, not in some distant future, not in some moment when we all go to heaven, like we all go up into the sky and everything's perfect then. No. The kingdom of heaven is supposed to be God doing that right now. It's a present reality as well as something going on in the future. But when Jesus says the kingdom of heaven can be compared to, this is this idea of what people were longing for. And I'll be honest, if I think of what I'm longing for, like in the deepest part of me, an upending of the current political and social and spiritual culture in a way that sort of reclaims it from oppression, that restores peace and fairness. I don't think it's something just that people were longing for in the first century. I think it's something that people are longing for all the time, a thing that people hope for and desire at their core. Yeah, I know I do. Like when I read the news, I'm longing for what people understood when they heard Jesus say the kingdom of heaven. The right way things are supposed to be. Like, that's what I'm longing for. So the parable, that's like the preamble to the parable. The kingdom of heaven can be compared to, and what it says that the kingdom of heaven can be compared to is someone who sowed good seed in his field. So, again, ancient cultures are different than our modern culture, and that means that sometimes there are things that we don't understand because they're just different. And this is one of those moments. Agriculture in this part of the world at this time was different than the way we practice agriculture today, the way we grow our food today. Most of the time, when we grow our food today, it's one person that owns a big plot of land, or maybe one company that owns a big plot of land, or multiple giant plots of land. They're sowing the seed. They're doing the same sowing of the seeds, right? Obviously with very different mechanisms for doing that. But that is not the way it happened in the ancient world. Communities in the ancient world planted together. Sometimes they actually shared the plots of land, right? Multiple families would be planting together. And the community was planting often next to each other, plots that were next to each other. So when it says here that an enemy went and sowed bad seeds, sowed weeds into the field, it wasn't just an attack on one person. This was something that would affect multiple people and likely the whole community, right? So this was an attack that was bigger than just one person. It wasn't like that somebody ticked somebody off and like that person was trying. It's bigger than that. Yeah. Community wide. It's all of the people. And so when this happened, I mean, it's just, it can be devastating to a whole community. And then it's this interesting seed. There's a guy named Kenneth Bailey. And look, I'm going to be honest. I think a lot of people do stuff with parables where they go way into too much detail and extrapolate all kinds of meanings from minutia that's not ultimately valuable or meaningful to the parable. But I think this scholar, Kenneth Bailey, his insight actually is something that can be a little bit helpful to us. And that is that he says, I might get this wrong, exactly how to pronounce it. He says that the seed that's mentioned here is a seed for a plant called zizania. I think that's right. Yeah, zizania or zizania. And what he says is that this seed, it's particularly poignant to the parable because this seed, when it sprouts, it looks very much like wheat. And so when the seeds sprout, when the wheat and the weeds sprout next to each other, it's going to be really hard to understand which seed is which. And so that's why he says, like, if you pull them up, it's going to damage the plants, and you're not going to be able to tell. You're not going to be able to tell which one is which, right? You're gonna pull up some of the good wheat, and you're gonna pull up some of the. You're gonna think you're pulling up wheat when you're pulling up wheat, and you're gonna think you're pulling up. Like it's a mess. Like this is a particularly bad mess. And so it says that the person who's planting, the farmer, decides to just let them grow up together, right? Because when this seed grows up, it's obviously a weed. It doesn't look like wheat forever. Eventually, at the end of all of this, the farmer will be able to, or the harvesters will be able to tell the difference between these two types of plants. Whereas right here at the beginning, it's hard. It's hard to figure out like what's going on. What's the good stuff and what's the bad stuff? This parable consolidates so much of the human experience into this one image. And that is that, well, people love to judge other people right away. So the metaphor is that these seeds, these weeds, and the wheat, that's people, and God is sort of the farmer. And we love to judge quickly. In fact, we're actually wired that way. Like it's good. It's helpful to be able to size up a situation pretty quickly and to be able to walk in and be like, I'm not safe here, right? Or talk to a person and be like, ooh, there's something that's kind of creeping me out about this person, right? There's all these different, I don't know, just really helpful things about being able to judge quickly. And yet, we all know that sometimes you judge somebody. There's that adage, you can't judge a book by its cover, that the first impression might not be right all the time. Yeah. And so this thing that is really helpful to us, and like it's like evolutionarily helpful, like it's helpful at a really deep level, can also be very unhelpful when it comes to relationships, when it comes to people, especially because a lot of times when we size somebody up, we size them up in an instant, in a particular setting, at a particular moment in time. And some people, when they're surrounded by the right people or the wrong people, they just give off a different vibe. And you can be around somebody and be like, oh man, I like this person. They're really cool. They're so much fun. And then you go to another setting with them and you're like, whoa, actually they're kind of awful. I don't like them. Like I like them in the work setting, but man, when we hung out socially, that was awful. I could never be. I thought I was going to be friends. I could never be their friend. They'll be a good colleague, but man, that's awful. We've experienced that, right? We've experienced when our impression of somebody, it's not great. We've experienced people doing that to us. People judging us because at work we're maybe hard charging, successful, whatever. But then in the rest of our life, we're pretty laid back, right? Like that happens. That happens all the time for us. And so it's really like this idea that immediately we're going to judge the wheat from the weeds. Like sometimes they can look the same, right? Yeah. And the other thing is we aren't the same forever, right? I mean, I know that for me, I have moments when I look back in my life and I'd be like, oh yeah, I was really solid then. I was a good friend. I was a good neighbor. I was a good worker. And then I sort of fast forward and I realize, oh geez, for a couple of years there, I just fell off the edge of the earth. I was not a good friend. I was not a good family member. Like I was no good during that time. And then fast forward a little bit more and I'm like, oh yes, but I got my life back on track. It was a great moment. There was another several years of being in a good place and being the person I want to be. And that's the thing, right? We experience that ourselves, that we are just not the same person from day to day, from week to week, from year to year. Like things change. We change. And as we change, sometimes we become better. Sometimes we become worse. Sometimes we start looking more like the wheat. And sometimes we look more like the weeds. Yeah. And so one of the things this parable says is like, you got to be patient with the world. You've got to be patient with people. You've got to be patient with yourself. To not judge yourself. Like, I am right now who I will be forever. My life is getting worse and worse. I am getting worse and worse at work, and I'm just going to keep this downhill slide. That's not it. That's not it. You're not the same forever. You need to have patience with yourself. And patience with yourself, knowing that there are times when you have been in good times and bad times. You've been better and worse as a person, as a human. You got to be patient with yourself. And at the same time, not just permissive to do nothing and to never try to become a better version of yourself. No. Just be patient and be like, okay, yeah, I've gotten into a bad spot. I've turned into more of a weed, and I need to start working on that. I need to start moving in a better direction, Yeah. You got to be patient with yourself. But you also need to be patient with other people. And don't get me wrong, I don't mean that you need to let people walk all over you or be horrible to you. I don't mean that at all. What I mean is that you need to give yourself just a little bit of space when you are experiencing another person, right? Like I remember that I grew up with this person and I did not like them, right? I didn't like them. Like, they weren't my kind of person when I was growing up, and they were kind of mean to me and whatever. And then you turn around and you meet them 10 years later. And I was like, man, this person is really chill. Like, this is the kind of person that I want to hang out with. Like, that I'd love to be my friend if we lived closer to each other. Right? Because, like, it changed. 10 years is a long time. It's a lot of progress, forward or backwards, somebody can make. Discovering things about themselves, right? So being patient with other people is this idea of saying, like, look, you don't have to be around people who are toxic, but don't assume that somebody's going to be toxic for the rest of their lives, right? Just as you can make progress, they can make progress too. You might need to write them off for a little while. Don't get me wrong. You might need to just take a break and be like, no, you are not my people. But then at some point, when you come back around, when they show up, you got to say to yourself, wait a second, I need to not come to this with this fully preconceived idea. I need to pay attention, but maybe they're different. And the other piece is that, sometimes you look at a person and they look really good, but really they're not. Sometimes you look at yourself and you're putting on a good face, but you also know what's going on inside you. Yeah. You need some work. You need some healing. So it's important. This parable says to us also, just know you can be fooled. You can think a person is bad when they're not, or a person is good when they're not. And ultimately, this parable sort of says, like, at the end of the day, you got to protect yourself, but don't just judge people forever. The only person that can ultimately judge is God, right? If you believe in God. Yeah, this parable, right? Yeah. I find that one of the things when I am trying to become a better version of myself, right? Trying to improve, one of the best ways to do that is as part of a community. And we have this community called Not Church, where we do just this. We do the parable of the wheat and the weeds all the time, where we are trying to figure out our own spiritual practices and beliefs that work well for us, that help us become the best version of ourselves, find a purpose greater than ourselves, maybe experience transcendence, a connection with the divine, or just transcendence in the sense that we can rise above what's going on in our life. if you are interested in that, I think you'd love it. You can go to patreon.com/skepticpastor, patreon.com/skepticpastor, and it's $3 a month. $3 a month because it's a faith community, but it's a faith community that is full of people who were manipulated out of their money, right? All kinds of religious identities, and we just don't do that. We don't ask people to donate. We just pay for what you get. So yeah, you can do that. Patreon.com/skepticpastor. And if wherever you listen to this podcast, just give it all the ratings and stars and really share it with a friend. Sharing it with a friend is super helpful, and we would really appreciate it. All right, I'm going to be doing some questions and answers. So if you've got questions that you would like to have answered, you'd like me to answer, you can just go ahead and put those in the chat. I'm going to be checking the chats on TikTok and on Instagram and on YouTube. Let me open up YouTube because we are live in all of those three places. And so if you've got a question, go ahead and put it in the chat. Okay, we've had let's see. I'm looking at some of these chats, looking for questions. Somebody asked, where do I find this parable? It's Matthew chapter 13, that one that we were talking about. Let's see. Somebody said I love weed. Yeah. All right. Okay. If you have a question, I'd love to answer it. You can post those questions on TikTok, on Instagram, and on YouTube. And the podcast. Somebody asked about the podcast. The podcast is called Unbelief. You can get that. Wherever you find podcasts. But if you have a question, I would love to answer that. Just throw that in the chat, and we've got a whole bunch of people viewing, and it's really great to see all of you. Thank you for the diamonds. Yes, on TikTok, that's really great. It always takes a minute for what I say to actually make it out to everybody. So we're waiting just to see if anybody's got questions. You can put that on TikTok in the comments, on Instagram in the comments, on YouTube in the comments. Okay, let's see what we've got. All right. Here we go. This one's from Instagram. Do you believe that Matthew was actually written by Matthew? I've read it was written many years later than that. You are right. The authorship of the books, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were not written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The earliest people who are talking about those books don't talk about them as being written by them. And in fact, that the naming of them comes actually much later in the process. Years and years later, you start seeing them attributed to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And it's like it's really interesting why each of those names is given to them. John is there's the disciple that Jesus loved, but that's a problematic thing to make John the author of it, because it actually says, it uses the plural, like these are the things that we've seen and we believe that they're true. So it's a community that's writing that one. And then there's like yeah, it's really interesting how those names came to be. But yeah, the Gospels were not written by those people, but they are attributed to them for a number of different reasons. That doesn't mean that they aren't reliable. They are not firsthand eyewitness accounts, though. They developed out of a bigger tradition. So Monica Arapillo, I hope that helps. No problem for grammar. Everybody is used to that. All right, my kids go to a fundamentalist church with their dad. How can I help prevent extreme indoctrination? This is great. This is from Charisse on TikTok. Okay, first, I'm really sorry that that's where your kids are, and I get it. You do not want them to have extreme indoctrination. I don't know your custody arrangement, and if you are living in the same town, if you have sort of split custody, I think in an ideal world, you would find a faith community that you could take your kids to that was progressive. And when they were with you, they would get some of that more progressive, less fundamentalist teaching. That would be ideal. But I know that that's not always possible, right? When that's not always possible, if you have FaceTime with them, it's important to talk about God. Talk about what you believe about God. Ask them what they believe about God. And then begin to instill some critical thinking values when it comes to spirituality, right? So by that I mean, when they give you a Bible verse that they learned, ask them what they think that Bible verse means. And they might just say something sort of on the face of it. And you're like, yeah. But what is a deeper meaning to that Bible verse? And you can talk about how things like the Bible and science are two different sets of tools to analyze the world. So you don't want the Bible to give you scientific information, and you don't want the science to try to give you spiritual information. That's another thing to sort of the kind of discussion to have with them. And then another really important piece is to talk to them about what things are defined by cultures, right? Like, gender is defined by culture, right? You can think of all sorts of things that we associate with gender, like boys being blue and girls being pink. That was the opposite if you go far enough back. So gender, a lot of things are defined by culture, and say, like, you know what? You don't actually want to go back to an ancient culture and try to bring that culture to today, because we understand a lot more about the world and about science, about all kinds of things. And we live in like in the Bible, they lived in a world that was very misogynistic and patriarchal, and we don't want to do that. Like, men bought women bought their wives like that. Nobody thinks that's a good idea. So we don't take those cultural values from the ancient world and bring them into the modern world one for one. So some of those concepts, if you can do that, because those bigger concepts can then be used to discuss things like marriage or LGBTQ people or evolution or all of these different things, so that if you've sort of instilled these bigger concepts, you can go back and be like, oh yeah, that sounds like you're saying that, like your Sunday school teacher or pastor over there was saying that, like, the Bible, which is a religious text, a spiritual text, is supposed to give you science. But I mean, like, we know that's not the same. I hope that helps, Charisse. Just answering questions. You can post them on Instagram in the chat, on TikTok, or on YouTube. We are in all of those places. Okay. Why did God send Satan to earth instead of straight to hell? GTH, that's one way of looking at it, but that's not, Satan as a character is a frustrating concept to try to find specifically in the Bible. And what you're actually talking about, God sending Satan to earth, actually doesn't even exist in the Bible. It exists in the Enochic literature. That's where that comes from. I would say that I don't think that the Bible answers that question. Also doesn't particularly say that explicitly. A lot of things also that people associate with Satan in the modern, in a lot of evangelical or fundamentalist churches, are things that weren't talking about a spiritual being at all. They were talking about a specific ruler at the time. So I hope that helps. If you've got questions, I'd love to answer them. Let's see. Philippe, I watched your videos and have shared a similar journey from growing up in the church. Good on you. Oh, thank you so much, Philippe. I appreciate that. I'm late. Are these questions we ask our kids or our parents? Oh, that was a person that was asking, Megan, was asking, they said that their husband took their kids to a fundamentalist church, and how could they prevent extreme indoctrination? And that was, those are the things that that I was suggesting they talk to their kids about. And I'm a Jehovah's Witness, and I have really enjoyed your content. Thanks, Neen. I appreciate that. I'm so happy that's been helpful for you. Charisse, you are so welcome. Philippe, what are your thoughts on the Council of Nicaea and how the Bible was put together? I've got some really great thoughts on that, I hope. I mean, the Bible was not put together at the Council of Nicaea. We actually have some notes of what went on at the Council of Nicaea, and the Bible was not discussed there. Which books were in the Bible was not discussed there at all. That idea was popularized by a guy named Dan Brown, who wrote the Da Vinci Code. It's in the Da Vinci Code, and it's interesting. That's a wonderful book. I love the Da Vinci Code. It is fiction. The Council of Nicaea did absolutely nothing in regards to the canon. There was a long development over the canon over about 1,500 years. The canon was eventually closed by something called the Council of Trent in 15-something. And so little by little, what happened really early on was we have something called the Mercurian, I can't remember, fragment. And it's from very, very early, before 200. And it lists a bunch of books of the Bible, of the New Testament, as which are authoritative, which were scripture, and it's almost all of the ones we have. So it was very early on that Christians sort of developed a consensus around which books were authoritative, which books were the right books. And then really, I think it's somewhere in the 300s or 400s that the canon as it exists, I should say the New Testament as it exists today, was sort of decided on and was just there for the rest of forever, for well over 1,000 years before they said, okay, we're gonna call it nothing else. Nothing has happened in the last over 1,000 years. No books have been added or thought of as whatever. So we're closing it down. That was the Council of Trent. The Council of Nicaea really was to settle an argument about the Trinity and something called the Arian controversy, and just not about the books of the Bible. I hope that helps, Philippe. Okay, Lex, I have a hard time with women being seen as inferior in Christian churches. Any advice? Well, they aren't. They are seen as inferior in fundamentalist and many evangelical churches. They are not in an enormous percentage of churches. Women are not inferior. In fact, those verses that people talk about women not talking in church, those are very contextual to the communities that Paul was talking to. And so modern scholars don't say that these things are something that should be extrapolated for all of churches everywhere. In fact, even at that time, they had women that were in charge of faith communities. There's one called Junia, who was full on a pastor, basically, at that time. So that whole thing. So it's not all Christian churches. Now, the really loud ones and the ones that get a lot of news coverage and a lot of TikTok videos made about them, yes, those are horrible, misogynistic, but it's not all of them. In fact, there's an enormous percentage that are not that way. I hope that helps, Lex. What about, let's see. Do I believe in the Trinity? I don't generally give my personal beliefs about things because, they're my personal beliefs. And it's kind of like, you generally, when you're talking to a doctor, you don't ask them about the prescriptions they're taking, right? You want them to tell you medical practice, like what's the best knowledge that they have, and try to help you with what you're doing. So yeah, I would say, I don't address that now. As far as Christianity is concerned, and I would say I'm a practitioner of Christianity. The Trinity is a really, really, really important doctrine. In fact, when somebody doesn't believe in the Trinity, they generally are considered outside the bounds of Orthodox Christianity. So, I hope that helps. And all right, let's see. Philippe, what about the books that were left out? There weren't books that were left out, Philippe. There are books that have been discovered that talk about Jesus. I should say there aren't. Yeah, so they're not books that were left out. There are books that have been discovered. Those books were written way later than the books that are in the New Testament, and so one of the things that very early on that Christians decided is that, like, look, if somebody's going to write a book about Jesus, we're not going to, like, if it's today, right, we're not going to say that that's the Bible, it's scripture. And so the books that are not in there are books that were written way later. Okay. Okay. Oh, you're ex-Jehovah's Witness. Gotcha. Do you really believe that God has not spoken through other people over the last 2,000 years? I would not say, this is not my beliefs, but as far as Christianity is concerned, that is not what they say. That is not what Christians would say. They would say that there's a difference between something that is scripture. It's a sort of fundamentally different thing. And for Christianity, all of those books were written a long time, very close to Jesus's time. So, but that doesn't mean that God isn't speaking through people. God isn't speaking. In fact, many people still believe that God is speaking, but they don't believe that sort of authoritative texts at the level of the Bible are being written, because all of that sticks pretty close to home in terms of the time period into which Christianity was being birthed, and trying to sort of make sure that things are really close to the time of Jesus when they're considering them scripture. I hope that helps. Okay. Are there any verses that support being gay and a Christian? Yes, there are. First off, the verses that people say don't support homosexuality or anti-homosexuality, there's not. I've got a verse-by-verse video that you can go through. There's also a podcast. I do this podcast called Unbelief. One of the episodes is a verse-by-verse breakdown. Now, as far as supporting it, there's this verse in Romans chapter 1, And it says that people gave up their natural desires for unnatural ones, and that giving up their natural sexual desires for unnatural sexual desires is evil. And so when you talk to queer people, your queer friends, they'll tell you that they were that way from the beginning. Their natural desires are, they're gay, like a gay man. They are. It's for people who are male. That's their natural desire. So what that would mean is that they're to do the opposite for them, to have heterosexual relationship would be going against their natural desires, and therefore Romans chapter 1 would say that it's bad. You shouldn't do that. Hope that helps. But if you want to like deep dive into that podcast episode is probably the best unbelief podcast. And if you just want a sort of quicker version of that, I've got a verse by verse video pinned to my profile. You can check that out. Struggling with my faith, perceived Christians as an LGBTQ individual. You get lots of hate for being yourself. Jennifer, I understand 100%. It is hard being LGBTQ and a Christian and around Christian people, because the loud ones, the super conservative, the evangelical fundamentalist Christians are not affirming. And so I would say, Jennifer, one of the things that helps is finding that group of affirming Christian people. You can look for Episcopal churches. You can look for United Methodist churches. Many of those are affirming. But oftentimes people find themselves, I don't know if this is you, but in a place where there aren't Christian groups that are like that. I can tell you, we have a faith community called Not Church, part of our Skeptic Pastor community, and it's really great. It's very open and affirming. It helps is people that are trying to find spiritual beliefs and practices that work for them, to make them the best version of themselves, to help them find a purpose greater than themselves, experience transcendence. I think you would love it, actually. If you guys want to join that, you can go to patreon.com/skepticpastor, patreon.com/skepticpastor. It's $3 a month. It's $3 a month because, we've all had trauma around being manipulated out of our money, being told that the Bible requires 10% of your income, which it doesn't. And so everything in our community is paid for what you get. $3 a month gets you access. And if it doesn't work for you, that's fine. Just stop paying. It's really okay. I hope that helps. Critical thinking is crucial. Yeah, I hear you, Neen. B. White, they need to read my book. Yeah. If you want more about LGBTQ stuff, I have a book. I'm trying to see if I've got one here. It's called How to Not Suck as a Christian. Yeah, you can buy that on Amazon. There's a link in my profile. All those things. Thoughts on the Roman Catholic Church? I have a lot of Roman Catholic friends. It's the oldest Christian denomination. And I don't know, there's lots of good and bad. Lots of good and bad in every group, in every religious group. You're welcome for giving a well thought out answer. When you say you're a skeptic, what do you mean you're a skeptic about? I'm a skeptic about absolutely everything. I am a person that wants to form my beliefs based on data. And that means that I'm looking for data wherever I find it, and trying to reputable data. So for religion, the tools you use to collect data, religious data, is the tools of religion or spirituality. If you're looking for geology, you're going to go to geologists, right? Cosmologists for the beginning of the universe, like all that kind of stuff. And so I'm a skeptic about everything. I want what I believe about any particular subject to be based on data. And being a skeptic also means that you assume that you're wrong. Assume that you're wrong about a number of different things. You just don't know what. And so you hold all those beliefs with an open hand. And the more data you have about something, the less likely you are to let it go. So I hope that helps. I'm going to take one more. I'm going to take one more question. And we'll do that from TikTok. Do you think, hang on. Okay. Do you think being a progressive is necessary for being a good Christian? I don't know. I don't think so. I know a lot of people who are loving and are conservative. I think, though, to be a good Christian, you need to accept everybody. You need to love everybody. You need to not be all about shaming everybody. And so you can have conservative beliefs on a number of different things, and I think still be like an authentically living Christian. There are some issues that I don't personally. I would have a hard time saying that you're like being a really, as you say, good Christian. If you have those beliefs. But yeah, I've got conservative friends who are loving and accepting, affirming, that are not judgmental, that are not trying to like argue with everybody and tell them they're wrong about what they believe about God or whatever, that believe science, all of those things, that are actually conservative people. So I would say, yeah, I don't think you need to be a progressive to be a good Christian. But some of the, some things that people would consider progressive beliefs, I think, are actually part of like table stakes for following the teachings of Jesus. Okay. So I hope you guys, I thank you so much for spending some time with me. We are, the podcast that we were recording earlier, it's going to come out, actually it's going to come out tomorrow. So I'd love for you to look at that. That's the Unbelief Podcast. If you want to be part of our religious community, Not Church is that thing. And that is patreon.com/skepticpastor. And then, you know what? I also do one-on-one pastoral meetings, and there's a link to that in my profile.